I can say to my new Samsung Galaxy S25 Ultra, hey, find a keto-friendly restaurant nearby and text it to Beth and Steve. And it does, without me lifting a finger. So I can get in more squats anywhere I can. 1, 2, 3.
Will that be cash or credit?
Credit. 4.
Galaxy S25 Ultra, the AI companion that does the heavy lifting so you can do you. Get yours at Samsung.com. Compatible with select apps. Requires Google Gemini account. Results may vary based on input. Check responses for accuracy.
This episode is brought to you by Shopify. Forget the frustration of picking commerce platforms when you switch your business to Shopify, the global commerce platform that supercharges your selling wherever you sell. With Shopify, you'll harness the same intuitive features, trusted apps, and powerful analytics used by the world's leading brands. Sign up today for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/tech, all lowercase. That's shopify.com/tech.
Atheists, agnostics, long-haired weirdos, short-haired weirdos, vandals, hooligans.
The government, hug the government, love the government, hug the government, love the government, hug the government.
Welcome to The Politics Guys, a place for bipartisan, rational, and civil debate on American politics and policy. I'm Northern Kentucky University political scientist Michael Baranowski. I'm joined today by my conservative counterpart, Cleveland area attorney and defender of freedom, Jay Carson.
Hey, good morning, Mike.
Hey, Jay, how are you doing this morning?
Well, I'll tell you, this last week I've been busier than the Atlantic's Yemeni subscription department.
Oh, very good.
But I've made it through and here to talk this morning. So
yeah, and we of course will be talking about what's being called Signalgate and tariffs and targeting law firms, all sorts of stuff. But before we get to any of that, I want to thank everyone who either became a new supporter or increased their level of support for the show after my whole iceberg ahead sort of message a few weeks ago. And I'm sure no one wants to listen to a big string of names, so I won't do that to folks. But I did make a point of personally thanking everyone who's sort of stepped up to keep us going past the midterms and beyond. And if you didn't get your thank you, check your Patreon message or your spam folder. I think I covered everyone. If didn't, I apologize and thank you again. And a whole bunch of supporters included messages. There was Garrett who said, this podcast is literally political therapy for me, and I couldn't imagine not having it available. Yeah, I thought, and he said, upping my monthly contribution is the simplest decision I'll make this week. And there were just so many comments like that. Dave, who's one of our new executive producers, said, it's important to keep demonstrating that civility in political discussion is possible. The collective demeanor makes the podcast trustworthy, and I'm very fortunate to be able to support it. Another one of our new executive producers, Jason, said, I listen to a lot of podcasts. This is the only one I support. When I heard your call to action, I didn't hesitate. And because of all of the support we've gotten the last couple of weeks, we're nearly where we need to be to ensure our longer-term sustainability. And to get us the rest of the way, one of our executive producers, Don Oglesby, Don is going to match up to $500 in donations in whatever form. It could be monthly pledges of support on Patreon, PayPal, one-time donations through PayPal or Venmo. So if you can help out, maybe you've been on the fence or you have some funds you can contribute to the cause, now they will count for twice as much thanks to Don. And this is a limited time offer. It's a great way for you to double the impact of your support, before Don comes to his senses. So thank you very much. Like I said, we're nearly there, and that outpouring of support has been incredibly gratifying. We really, really do appreciate it. All right. And of course, I should mention, as always, support links in the show notes. So this week, senior Trump administration officials have been, I guess I'd say, embroiled in what's being called Signalgate, the sort of bizarre and presumably inadvertent inclusion of the Atlantic's editor-in-chief, Jeffrey Goldberg, in that Signal group text concerning the strike on Houthi rebels in Yemen. A national security advisor of Michael Waltz was responsible for adding Goldberg to the chat, which might not have been as much of an issue had Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth not revealed multiple operational details of that upcoming strike. And to be clear, they're attack plans, not war plans, a distinction we're learning a lot about in this last week. But anyway, Goldberg held off on reporting this until after the strike, so I guess at least someone cares about operational security. But when he did initially report on it, White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt responded on X that it was another hoax written by Trump haters, by a Trump hater who is well known for a sensationalist spin. Communications Director Stephen Chung called it a weaponization of innocuous actions by anti-Trump forces that fake news outlets can use to peddle misinformation. And then Goldberg said, oh, yeah? Well, here are the texts. And that made it a little more difficult, especially once the White House had to acknowledge that those texts were, in fact, legitimate. And so later on this week, Thursday, Judge James Boasberg ordered that the top officials named in a lawsuit by the group American Oversight, that they retain any messages sent and received in Signal on those dates. It was March 11th through 15th, but declined at this point to order officials to disclose if Signal is being used by the administration in a wider context. And as all this was going on, this is part of previously scheduled hearings before the House Intelligence Committee. Director of National Intelligence Tulsi Gabbard, who was part of that Signal chat, said, well, she couldn't recall whether that information on weapons, packages, targets, or timing had been discussed. And so responding to that, Jim Himes, who's the ranking Democrat in the committee, read aloud from the transcript in which Hegseth had mentioned, well, all sorts of things about weapons and timing, and then said to Gabbard, so you're saying in that 2-week period, you simply forgot that was there? And I guess so. So I think I was wondering then if Tulsi Gabbard's maybe just a well-meaning middle-aged woman with a poor memory or something like that. Anyway, but so late this week, the Wall Street Journal's editorial board wrote, the administration seems to think it can bully its way through anything by shouting fake news and attacking the press. Sometimes it needs to admit a mistake, take the loss, and move on. And, you know, Jay, you usually move pretty closely with the Journal's editorial board, or maybe they move in lockstep with you. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. One of these ways.
The Journal typically follows my lead. And I think in this case, they get it exactly right. One of to me, the biggest stumbling blocks that the American people have right now with politics in general from either party, it's not even the partisanness, the attacks. It's a wishing for general competence, right? They have the adults in the room, and the rap on Trump from a lot of folks on the right or in the center leaning right has always been, listen, okay, you know what? We are actually okay with the policies. We prefer him on a whole lot of issues, and we think he'll do better on those issues. But what we don't like, and this is what you saw in the 2020 election, which you can maybe put an asterisk because of COVID and all that, but is a desire for normalcy, right? Or at least stop the chaos. And it's one thing to have the I think chaos, broken china of Doge or something like that, where you are going in and saying, hey, we've got a policy goal here. We're going to trim back government. It's going to be a little chaotic. It's going to be a little messy, but you're doing in pursuit of a policy aim that people support. Whereas this is just complete unforced error and the back of the response again is flat-footed and I think in some ways insulting to, people who are watching, right? That I think is sort of a big problem that the American public has with politics these days, and it's both parties, right? It's the gaslighting, right? That having gone through years of course, Joe Biden's the sharpest guy in the room, nothing wrong here, and now this, well, no, of course, we didn't text it. And when somebody says, hey, I've got the texts, you don't go out and say, it's one of those, I think, again, just poorly handled, setting aside any, the wisdom of talking on Signal or how this stuff's communicated. The notion that you just would come back with deny gaslighting, when you know that they've got the text. You could say, JD, do you have these texts? Pete, right? I mean, it's not as if this is some sort of fast moving thing where the information was not available. It was. And again, to me, it's I don't know whether it's different parts of the administration not talking to one another, not doing one another, or not coming up with a global plan to handle this, or if it is a across the board strategy of deny, deny, deny. But to me, this would have been so much easier, so much better, and would have gone away. I think we'd still be talking about it this week, but we probably wouldn't be talking about it in a couple of weeks if the administration had just said, "Oh, geez, yeah, this was a big screw up of security. We won't tolerate this. Waltz, you're fired.
Yes.
Nobody do Signal anymore." And thank goodness this really important military operation wasn't compromised.
Yeah,
I mean, you know what I mean? You do that, and you, like the journal says, you take the L, right?
Yeah, I mean, to me, there are a number of issues here, and the first one, as you pointed out, just the shocking lack of operational security by the National Security Advisor. That's firing him is a no-brainer, and you can make the case that Hegseth at least should be taken to the woodshed, if not, then he has, of course, he's had his issues more than just this, and maybe some would say this is what happens when you put a Fox News host in charge of the Department of Defense.
Right.
And I think
to me, this also goes to a sense of, where are the grown-ups, right? And there's something else that troubled me actually a little bit. And this is, I'm going a little far afield, but this is a different kind of political show than most political shows. Something that troubled me was the tone, the language that was used back and forth in this. That to me sort of struck me as kind of a lack of seriousness, and maybe that's, I don't know, maybe I'm just reading something into it, but that isn't there.
Well,
do you follow me? I mean,
well, I think certainly though, I'm tired of bailing out Europe again and all this sort of, and then the emojis and all that sort of. This is supposed to be like a business sort of, I mean, right, very serious business. You shouldn't be texting American flag fire emojis or whatever the hell Vance or Hegseth did. Exactly. What are you? Some child? But apparently,
yeah. So something. This is, as some listeners know, my mom passed away recently, and she was really sort of an inspiration for me and sort of got me into, public affairs, right? Politics. And just because she was a political junkie. And she had said that one of the things that really had turned her off or turned her around on Nixon during Watergate was when the tapes were released. And it wasn't the content, the substance of the tapes that she found really troubling. It was all the profanity. Now you can say, look, this is a different time, right? And, mom didn't want people, you shouldn't be talking like that. That's no way to talk. But it struck her as again, it was just sort of this common vulgarity kind of thing. And that, this is sort of gutter talk. This isn't the way leader of the free world should be talking, right? Now, look, I there before the grace of God go I. You shouldn't, I certainly can let fly with, pretty descriptive language, but I'm certainly no Lyndon Johnson, and certainly presidents, executive officers, important people have talked like this, as everybody has when they get frustrated and mad, and throughout history. But there's something to that. Right. That it seems like, again.
Well, I hear what you're saying.
It's not the grown-ups. Yeah.
I hear what you're saying. But to me, the bigger issue is this was a call about, or a text chain about, an impending military action.
Oh, no. I'm not trying to. Yeah, just be clear. I'm not trying to downplay the security significance of it. I'm saying
number one, my first question was, why wasn't this done in SCIFs? The secure, and because plenty of top officials actually have them in their own homes, or certainly can, or they can set up portable SCIFs for stuff like this. It seems to me that you should not be using some third-party, non-governmental, non-secure app. And not only that, but there's the question of, and I think it's a reasonable question to raise as well.
They didn't do it on TikTok, at least.
Yeah, well, maybe they're doing it. Maybe they're doing it because they don't want the record preserved. And, according to the Federal Records Act, you can make a case, and American Oversight is making that case, that this sort of automatically self-deleting nature of Signal means that these conversations that included the vice president are being, in fact, deleted in not in accordance with the law. And I think that's a problem. And I think just more generally, if you go back in time, you see on both sides of the aisle, top national security officials being incredibly cavalier about this sort of thing. And if it's not okay for Sandy Berger to stuff documents down his pants, which it isn't, right? And Jay, the reference.
That's how they did it in the good old days, Mike.
But it's not okay.
Goldberg had a great piece on that.
This is unacceptable. And not only that, but then, because Donald Trump and his administration, they don't back down. They double down, no matter how wrong they are, right? And so, as luck would have it, the judge randomly assigned this case James Boasberg, who's the same guy. Yeah, I mean, the chief judge of the D.C. District Court there, right? And the same guy who's the Venezuelan gang deportation thing. And so, what Trump's response
and the
was,
FISA warrant and the
but his response: how disgraceful is it that judge, in quotation mark, James Boasberg, has just been given a fourth Trump case, something which is statistically, all caps, impossible. He's called for Boasberg's impeachment. There was an impeachment resolution proposed in the House, 22 co-sponsors. I mean, this sort of thing, my mind
I think that's very much that's a distraction from the real issue, which is that this is a tremendous lapse in security, and I can't come up with any good reason why it wasn't. This again, you might have said under Trump 1, when it was, hey, we just got here, we've never done this before, right? Maybe there's an argument there, but no, not after you've been in office for 4 years and you're familiar with all the national security capabilities and the requirements and regulations that go with it. And so it's to the point on using Signal because it's automatic deleted, and maybe I defer on that in terms of I think there could be sometimes reasons when that would be permissible for certain types of conversations, but going beyond that. Whoops, I lost my train of thought.
That happens to me all the time. I just keep on talking, and hopefully I underrails. But back to something you were saying, if Trump's national security advisor had been like H.R. McMaster or John Bolton, or if the Secretary of Defense had not been Pete Hegseth, this wouldn't have happened in the first place. These people clearly do not know what they're doing.
Yeah, that goes back to the sort of adults in the room type.
Right, and we certainly are seeing fewer and fewer of them. So yeah. Any other thoughts on this before we move on? I guess. Well, one thing I wanted to ask you is.
I'm sorry. Here's what I was going to say. When I got
derailed,
distracted by a squirrel outside the window.
That'll happen.
The idea that they're trying to delete the cover to get rid of this conversation, to me, doesn't strike me, because look, I don't think the conversation in and of itself, I don't think is a problem. I mean, there's nothing there. It may be a little embarrassing, right? But there's nothing improper, illegal, setting aside the security stuff, right? But on the merits of the conversation, and this goes back to the policy piece of, look, I think a lot of Americans, me among them, think that taking military action against Houthi rebels, rebel scum, who are attacking, civilian shipping lanes, I think that's a good idea. And I think most people would think it's a good idea. Well, the Houthis wouldn't, and I think our adversaries, the Russians and the Chinese, probably don't think that's a good idea. But it's a good policy thing, and it's a weird. Trump could have ridden, to glory, saying, "Listen, I've stopped the Houthi rebels and pirates from attacking shipping," but instead we're embroiled in this just because they were, and so anyway, what I'm saying is, I don't necessarily, just the use of Signal in and of itself, to me, doesn't point to a nefarious motive in violating the statute. Now, the statute doesn't require a nefarious motive, but I don't think we're seeing that, right? An attempt to destroy stuff. Because again, what some of the folks said may be sort of dumb. One, I don't think they would think it's dumb. So, there's not like, the stuff that, for example, that Vance texted, it's really not anything that he hasn't said publicly before anyway.
I would say this, that if they thought that they were on a platform where the records were being kept, they probably would have conducted themselves differently.
That's what I don't know about that. I think that's what I'm saying.
Maybe not anymore. Yeah. Given
I think that it may have been more of the same. So anyway, what I'm saying is I'm not. I look at this as more just plain screw up. And
yeah.
Why the Atlantic?
I mean, we're not getting any answers on that because Goldberg refused to answer questions about his relationship with Walt. It's weird, and yeah, I don't know.
It's like talking about group chats you don't want to be on. I get like I don't know how many updates a day on my phone and watch from the Atlantic, and it's always just whatever trashing Trump on something or other. And yeah, Jeffrey, how can I get out of all those updates? But secondly, if you're Trump, why are you inviting, the editor of the magazine, which seems to be most against you? I suppose there are more, maybe
plenty more,
Mother Jones or something like that is, but right? I mean, that's what seems inexplicable. And then there's the conspiracy theorists who have suggested, well, they meant for this to get out. Again, if that was the plan, it was a really terrible plan, and I'm not sure where it was going, right? And there's no need to. Anyway, those are the weird unanswered questions for me. But summarize, I think the Wall Street Journal editorial board gets it right that you say this was a screw up. Those who screwed up have been terminated, and it won't happen again. So.
And none of that happened, and none of it will.
But they don't, well, as we discussed, I mean, while the Wall Street Journal editorial board, I believe, does listen to me, I don't know that the administration does.
Well, speaking of the Trump administration refusing to back down and, in fact, doubling down in the case when they're met with resistance, also this week, President Trump issued a proclamation imposing a 25% tariff on imported vehicles and auto parts starting on April 3rd. And in announcing these tariffs, he said, this is the beginning of Liberation Day in America, and that for years we've been ripped off by virtually every country in the world, but those days are over. Now, there you go. The tariffs will hit hardest on the 5 countries for which we import the most vehicles. That's Mexico, Japan, South Korea, Canada, and Germany. And for imports from Canada and Mexico, the tariff is going to be based on the percentage of non-U.S. content. So, for example, if there's a vehicle made in Mexico as 50% American content, that 25% tariff will be halved to 12.5%. Now, last year, the U.S. imported around $214 billion in passenger vehicles, with an additional $192 billion in auto parts. And the new tariffs are expected to increase the average prices of vehicles somewhere between, at least those affected, between $3,000 to $10,000. This is according to the American International Automobile Dealers Association. And so you might be wondering, well, how can Donald Trump do this, given that we signed free trade agreements with Canada and Mexico and South Korea? Well, the legal authority he cited is Section 232 of the Trade Expansion Act of 1962, which authorizes the president to adjust tariffs on imports if they threaten or impair national security. And sort of in a preemptive response to retaliatory tariffs by the affected countries, Donald Trump said, if the European Union works with Canada in order to do economic harm to the USA, large-scale tariffs, far larger than currently planned, will be placed on both of them in order to protect the best friend that each of these two countries has ever had. And my first thought was, well, with friends like this. But anyway, so President Trump says he intends for these tariffs to be permanent, which in addition to increasing costs to consumers, going to have a significant effect on the global supply chains that are, it's essentially all automakers rely on. So, Jay, I guess I'm wondering, do you think there's an actual national security threat here from imported vehicles? And what do you think about these latest tariffs?
You should you should see the Subarus around my neighborhood, Mike.
They're looking sketchy.
No.
Yeah.
No, of course there's, I don't see this as a national emergency or a national security risk. Those parts of the statute were created to protect things like steel production, right? During wartime. You could make the argument now, maybe it would apply to something like microchips, biological stuff, vaccines. No, I think this is a complete stretch, and policy wise, I remain where I have always been, and where I think the Wall Street Journal editorial board will be next week. That the tariffs are, generally speaking, as a beginning principle, a bad idea. You can go back to some of friends of mine on the right have been circulating the Ben Stein from Ferris Bueller.
Sure.
Explaining, Hoot Smalley's tariffs anyone. But he's exactly right. The tariffs that were imposed, Smoot Hawley, just because it's fun to say in the Depression, lengthened the Depression. And the weird thing now to this kind of tariffs on automobiles, it's going to be inflationary in two ways, right? First, it's inflationary on the products that are actually targeted. But secondly, the idea is that, okay, now American manufacturers will be able to undercut those because they're selling it cheaper because they're not hit by those tariffs. But what will happen in reality, because this is what happens in reality, is that those automakers will figure out a way to raise their prices to the point where they can still undercut them safely and improve their sales, but without losing customers. So it's going to be inflationary across the board.
Well, on that point, Jay, it's been reported in a number of places that when he met with top executives from the big automakers, Donald Trump basically told them that they better not raise prices in response to tariffs, even if their costs go up. And if they did, they were going to face some retaliation from the administration. And my first thought hearing that is, my God, if anyone is an actual conservative anymore, that their heads just got to explode. Because
that's I'm waiting for the Adam Smith to rise from his grave, and
he's spinning.
It's just it's baffling because and especially I've made the point a number of times that in some cases tariffs or other economic sanctions are appropriate in order to get to other economic or national security goals. And I'm still at that place, right? I think we should play hardball with China, given their lack of respect for intellectual property and their willingness to violate trade agreements, all that stuff. But these straight ahead protectionist tariffs are anathema to what conservatives have believed, economic conservatives have believed in since the idea of economic conservatism arose. And I look at other, if we're concerned about immigration on the southern border, this was one of the selling points I always thought for NAFTA, right? Was if the problem that drove mass migration across the southern border, whether through Mexico or other places in Central America, part of it is the vacuum, the difference between the economies of the North and the South. So one way to help fix that is to have greater development and greater economic opportunity in Mexico and other Central American nations. And this does the opposite. This is sort of saying, well, we're going to, tax these the cars and parts that are coming in from Mexico and, try to put these Mexicans out of work. At which point, where does he think they'll go? Right. So I think policy wise, it's a bad idea all around. Politics wise, this is always one of those things of, well, maybe it plays for a while until it doesn't, right? Until people start seeing the impact that this actually has. And I think when you do something like 25% tariffs, the impact is going to be fairly quick. This isn't one of those things that's going to take a couple years or 6, 9, 10 months to develop. You'll start seeing it pretty soon.
Well, it might take around 6 months or so, because in anticipation of this, a lot of the automakers have been stockpiling and I think they have maybe like 2 or 3 months. But you're right. You can't hold off something this big for that long. One thing I'm wondering, I certainly agree with you on it being bad policy. But, as we've discussed before, just in terms of the legality, this potentially might raise a major questions doctrine issue, although to me, I would say, well, Congress did give the president clear authority to do this, but I think you can make maybe even a better case that it's possibly a non-delegation doctrine issue. And what I mean is that when Congress delegates, as you know, Jay, authority to the president, there has to be what's called an intelligible principle for executive action. And I think you can make the case here that just emergency is not enough of an intelligible or national, that maybe is too broad.
Well, I would say no. I mean, I might argue it the other way, and not that I don't love a good delegation argument, because
I know you do. Yeah,
and I think there ought to be more of them, and I think there's some coming.
They're brewing. Yeah,
but no, I would say that this isn't so much a thing of, well, the statute's written too broadly. It just fails on the merits, right? Of this, you just can't. A national security means something. It doesn't mean just, hey, I I want to help protect the American auto industry a little bit.
Agreed, but certainly courts tend to be most deferential to presidential actions when they involve national security. And to me, I think that it makes sense to have certain presidential emergency powers. But I think the problem is in how this legislation is written. If they're truly emergency powers, especially on things like tariffs, I would argue that, say, legislation that said president can impose emergency tariffs for, I don't know, that would sunset after
6 months,
whatever, 3 or 6 months. And then if it's a real emergency, that takes care of it, but it still retains the power in Congress to set longer term tariffs. Because honestly, if Congress can't act to impose permanent tariffs in, say, like 6 months, then it's clearly not a real emergency. Or unlikely. You see what I'm
saying? I would agree with that. I think, yes, I'm struggling mightily with this. So I would expect that there might be some suits coming challenging that emergency power, and I'm hopeful how that goes through the courts.
I guess my general feeling is that as long as Donald Trump can cite any sort of a remotely plausible national security sort of thing, that the courts are just going to stay out of it, basically, and say, this is sort of a political thing. If Congress
there is maybe some wisdom to that, right? That the courts could say, but regardless, I think the case is worth making, right? Because then the court can set out listen, we're not here to police this part of it. This is policed by the political process. And it's up to the American public to decide whether they believe this was really, and Congress to believe that if this is really an emergency. And if Congress does not believe so, it can amend the statute to make more clear what a national security or national security interests are. Because otherwise I think it's if you're just going to say this is national security and there's no time limit, there's no boxes to check, so to speak, that is a blanket delegation. I think it also fails on the merits. So, you're right.
Yeah.
And you're right. The president's going to get a wide strike zone on national security.
I guess I would say that even if
there's sort of this wonderful, not wonderful, but Trump has been in some ways sort of the greatest curse and the greatest gift to conservatism. In certain ways, so many of the Trump executive actions, things that the Whiggish type people like me bristle at, it's brought in courts who might not have pushed back on those kind of actions before. Now they're coming around, just like Democrats have finally wised up to the Russian threat. that I've been yelling about since the mid '80s. But I guess that's we'll see if something gets filed when these tariffs take effect.
Yeah, I think just in general, this just shows the danger of allowing, the danger of not really having an independent Congress and then just allowing the whims of one person to dictate our trade policy. There's a reason why the framers gave Congress this authority and not the president. And unfortunately, I don't think Congress is interested in taking it back anytime soon.
Yeah. Well, we'll see.
Yep. Well, all right.
We'll see. As you know, I've said quite a number of times, part of Trump's problem here is the same problem that every second-term president has, but him even more so, is that you're a lame duck on day one.
But I think there's an awful lot of, because of the fear and because of the combination of Trump and Musk, Donald Trump has a lot more power than a lot of second-term presidents would otherwise have. I guess I would also say that even if, and I think there are reasonable people who could say, you know what, I agree with sort of the long-term idea of what Donald Trump is trying to do. You and I don't, but I can understand that argument. You say, no, we really need to bring back American manufacturing, and this is just the way to do it. Even so, this is not the sort of thing, and Donald Trump is either delusional or lying if he thinks this is going to happen within even several years, because reshoring and bringing back, this is a project.
Well, no, it is billions and billions. So to some extent, like the Trump tax cuts and the Trump tax bill in the first term, right? When you say reshoring, bringing back capital to the United States, I think that was great, and that worked great, and I'm all for it. And that was one of the greatest accomplishments of the first Trump administration. But yeah, what you're talking about in terms of building up infrastructure, it's billions and billions of dollars of investment, private sector investment. And those people who are going to make those investments aren't going to do so unless they're pretty sure that this is going to be a long-term policy.
And that is key.
You're not going to go and build a new auto plant if Trump changes tariffs week to week.
Exactly. And that is why it's so important to have stability in these things, why the markets are tanking like crazy. And that is why it's much better for Congress to do this than the president, because it's a lot harder to change tariffs if Congress gets involved. And that's what we want. But, oh, well. Okay, well, I'm sure there will be more on this because
as always, free trade and stability.
Yep, the tariffs will keep on coming. We're waiting for the April 2nd, reciprocal tariffs, U.S. versus the world. So more where this came from. Hold on to your 401ks. I'm not even looking anymore. Just anyway.
All right. Opportunity, Mike. Look at it that way.
Yeah. All right. Moving on to something somewhat different. Earlier this week, President Trump signed an executive order on preserving and protecting the integrity of American elections, which that sounds like a good thing. I'm all for.
Why are you against that?
It's a good question. So now you dig down into the order. It focuses on what I'll call the non-problem, or almost essentially not even a problem, of foreign nationals voting in U.S. elections by requiring proof of U.S. citizenship. There's a mandate that in federal elections also a mandate that only ballots received, not just postmarked, by election day are to be counted. States will have to provide voter roll access to DHS and DOJ to assist with removal of ineligible voters from the rolls. And states that fail to comply may lose their federal election administration funding. And so, Jay, after I saw this executive order and read through it, I went back to the Constitution, always a good thing to go back to, rechecking Article 1, Section 4, and sure enough, it gives states the authority to prescribe the time, place, and manner of holding elections, and Congress, not the president, with the authority to make or alter federal election regulations. And I remember, Jay, when Republicans used to be really big on pointing out federal overreach like this. For instance, 2021, President Biden issues an executive order on federal elections, and there was this Republican lawsuit. Ohio's Attorney General, Secretary of State was involved. It was Frank LaRose.
Secretary of State.
Thank you. What was involved in challenging it, arguing that, quote, the delimited role for the federal government in elections is vested in Congress alone. not the president acting unilaterally without congressional authorization or appropriations. And I thought, yes.
And Frank LaRose is right.
There you go. I mean, Jay, to me, this all seems pretty unconstitutional. What do you think?
Well, I'm reading as I've read through the order again. I'm not clear exactly what it is that, he can do under this. Now, I think there are certain criteria that are currently set forth in statute in terms of, federal elections, baseline type stuff, where the president would have some authority to say stuff like this. But no, going back to your premise, this elections are sent to the states to determine the manner in which they're conducted. I think maybe the order serves as sort of a rhetorical piece. I don't know that it has any real impact. I'm not sure who would enforce it in any event, right? And I suppose Trump could try to embargo federal funds for states, but again, that's going to be a congressional question, and I think there will be a fight brewing there. So, I mean, I tend to look at the order as rhetorical excess. I don't know that it's got any teeth to it.
Well, I think it potentially does, but I also think that it's illegal in a number of ways. One thing I probably should point out, I don't think the president has the authority to do that, but also I think you can make a case that it could be in violation of the National Voter Registration Act of 1993. Back a while after that was passed, Arizona tried to require proof of citizenship for voting. There was a case, Arizona versus Intertribal Council of Arizona, 7-2. The Supreme Court, in a decision authored by Justice Scalia, said, well, no, you can't do this. Now, how this all works, kind of getting a little bit details. The U.S. has a thing called the U.S. Election Assistance Commission, and they have this national mail voter registration form. They are allowed to alter it, and they could, in fact, alter this form to include a requirement for proof of citizenship. Right now, there's just a checkbox. You affirm that you are a U.S. citizen,
and that would be by rule or by executive action.
Now,
that's what I'm saying. When some of this, I think, is within his authority.
Exactly. So how it works is that the president can't directly order that. EAC is technically an independent agency. There are 4 commissioners, 2 from each party. You have to have a majority to agree on changes for that. And you can understand why Congress would set it up that way with the 2-2 sort of thing. But you could also argue, and I'm sure the Trump administration is making this argument, that under a unified executive theory, the EAC as it's constituted is unconstitutional.
Isn't a legit.
Yeah, exactly. And so and I think on the Supreme Court, there are probably 4 votes for that position. I've said that before. You've got Thomas, Alito, Kavanaugh, maybe Gorsuch, but I don't really see this passing legal muster in the end. So I guess I agree with you that it probably is going to end up being more signaling than anything else. And I'll also point out that the potential consequences for states, because it's really not, they're not being forced to do this, just saying, hey, if you don't do this, you'll lose your election funds. So what does that mean? Well, there was this 2019 study by the National Association of State Budget Officers. They put federal contributions to elections at around 30.7%, so roughly a third of state election costs. And what does that mean? Well, there was one study that suggested that MIT did an election data study, around $8 per eligible voter for election administration, which roughly means like $3 to $4 million for the smallest states, least populous, over $200 million for, say, somewhere like California. But even then, in essentially every case, that's like well under or right around like 0.5% of state budgets. So it's not like this would be a crippling blow.
Yeah.
But it's not like money that the states want to give up as well. But it's not that.
Yeah, no, they never want to give up money.
Yeah.
So my point in this is largely rhetorical and is, or you say, signaling. I think, one, a lot of states do this sort of thing already. And second, as you point out, the budgetary impact is not huge. Would they whine and gripe about it? Sure. Is there a suit to be had out there? I don't know. I'm not seeing one just yet, right?
Right.
I mean, there is, right?
Well,
if a state says, "Hey, we're being deprived of our money, we want to file suit here." But yeah,
well, I think the only way this happens is I think the legal grounds is that Trump is ordering the Election Assistance Commission to change that form to actually require documentary evidence of citizenship. Right. And if the EAC says, or at least if the two Democrats on the EAC say nope, and then they say, well, we don't have a majority to do that, and then that's kind of that the administration can push forward on that, and say, well, the whole Constitution or the way the EAC is constituted is improper under the unified executive theory, and I think that's kind of how this would potentially move forward. But that would take a while, I would expect.
Right. That's what I'm saying. Yeah. This is, and even then, that's a little bit of an arcane issue.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. I think so.
Yeah, it's not. Yeah, so that's what I'm saying. This is sort of rhetorical in that Trump is for free and fair elections and only citizens voting in elections, which even the New York Appellate Court recently ruled that the city of New York cannot extend the franchise to non-citizens. So I think you're right. And is this a tremendous problem? No. Are states addressing this on their own? Should they address it on their own? Yes. And Frank LaRose was right.
All right. Well, and Frank LaRose is right. Well, we'll close now. But there's one other thing I want to ask you. I want to close on a somewhat lighter note, I hope, because we've been dealing with some pretty heavy stuff and some really depressing kind of stuff. And I guess the way
that wasn't particularly depressing. I mean, I suppose.
Anyway,
war and tariffs and that's depressing, but.
Well, the election stuff, of course, you and I have differences on that. And like a lot of folks on the left, I tend to see this as voter suppression. And I know we have our differences on that. But yeah, I have a problem with it. So, but on to something a little bit, I think, lighter. I have a question for you.
Yes.
Can you ever recall an American president more weirdly obsessed with Greenland than Donald Trump?
In fact, I don't know that any president's ever been. I'm trying to think of any president who has ever mentioned Greenland, right?
Yeah, I mean, and Donald Trump, just yesterday, he said, and I'm quoting verbatim, he said, we have to have Greenland. It's not a question of, do you think we can do without it? We can't. And I got to say, Jay, before this, I always assumed we probably would be able to somehow muddle through without Greenland. But
we made it this far.
I'm told by the president that we're basically doomed without Greenland. And we need to take it by any means necessary. In fact, J.D. Vance, in his trip there, said, the president said we have to have Greenland, and we can't just ignore the president's desires. I feel like there's this. You might not remember it, and maybe you weren't a fan of the show. There was this in the old Twilight Zone, the old black and white Rod Serling Twilight Zone.
Yeah.
There was this thing where there was this little kid, I think his name was Timmy, and he had this weird power to banish people to the cornfield and just turn them into
scared. This one played by Bill Mumy, right?
Yes, exactly what I'm talking about. And I feel like that's Donald Trump. Everyone's like, I'll banish you to the cornfield, turn you into a scare. And everyone's like, well, we can't upset Billy here, and I feel like it's just so bizarre. If any other
turns one of the parents into a Jack in the Box thing
yes.
at some point. Yeah.
I mean, if any other president had said stuff so bizarre, and I got to say, you got Greenland, we're making Canada the 51st state, we're taking the Panama Canal back. I mean, people who want to point to the whole, well, isn't this some kind of weird sort of soft fascism thing? Well, hey, he's certainly working on the authoritarianism bit. He's working on the nationalism bit. Now the military expansionism bit. I mean, well,
it's not like we were saying we want back our traditional ancestral lands of
Greenland. Yeah, exactly. No, but
where nobody's ever really lived.
But this is just. It's not just weird, Jay. It feels to me so fundamentally anti-American, or at least the American values
I would. The presentation, I think, is anti-American. The push, the idea, I think has some historical precedent, going back even to like the Monroe Doctrine, right? That we want to establish our sphere of influence as the preeminent power in the Western Hemisphere and Northern Hemisphere, right? That everything, and this is our turf. We're in charge here. And I think you can make the argument that it's sort of a counterbalance, or maybe a mirror image, or a attempt to keep up with what China's doing in Asia, expanding its territorial power through these building islands and so forth, and flying over Taiwan, and asserting its dominance, hegemony, if you will, as political science like to say. Good
word, yeah.
Over those areas. And I think Trump's trying to do the same thing. That he's doing it in sort of a ham-handed way is sort of, pure Donald Trump.
But it's like, what does he even mean when he says we've got to get Greenland? Well, what the hell?
Yeah, I'm not sure. Yeah.
That just seems so. Again, that's why I made that analogy because
at this point, and to some extent, look, in terms of spheres of influence and hegemony and all that, we sort of have Greenland.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
Well, we had them. Less now.
Right, but listen, there was no question of the U.S. having strategic access to Greenland, or if we wanted to pay to mine minerals there, I think that the Danes would let us. Yeah, so I don't dispute that Greenland can have some strategic value. Certainly, the Panama Canal has a lot of strategic value. Yeah, I'm not sure that it's not like we lost Greenland.
No.
You know what I mean?
But Donald Trump seems determined to just alienate.
That said, I mean, Seward said that we had to have Alaska, and everybody said he was crazy. But strategically, I think that's tremendously important, and proved tremendously important through the Cold War.
I guess it just shows to me sort of the fundamental, I'll say, ignorance and lack and unseriousness of Donald Trump in so much of what he says and what he does. And even if I would like to think that even if I agreed with most of his policies, that I would be appalled that someone who is so unserious and flippant, and not to mention all of his other flaws, would be in this position. And again, there are just days when I wake up and I look at the news and I just think, this is not how a president of the United States should, or a president of any country for that matter, should act.
Well,
and
here, if I were the president, and there's
talk. Yeah.
No, I was going to say there's some parallel universe where I am. I read this a book recently about parallel universes and so forth, and it's really troubling. We'll talk about that some other time, but I think you could, if you want to make out the case for Greenland, I think maybe you can, right? But,
sure.
But you make the case. You say, listen, this is important because it is a strategically placed in terms of radar systems, in terms of intercepting missiles that could be coming in from somewhere else. It's important because it's got some natural resources, some rare earths, some oil. We need to make sure we assert our influence over Greenland so that the Chinese or Russians do not. And we're in a good place to do that right now. And I would look forward to, working with the Danes to have more American involvement on Greenland. And we need to make this a national priority, because if you look around the world, what's happening, our adversaries are doing the exact same thing. They're trying to expand their spheres of influence. And it's important that, just as in the Cold War, that we continue the sphere of influence of American influence across the Atlantic. That'd be my,
sure,
2-minute pitch.
And that would be the sort of thing that you would have heard from maybe George H.W. Bush. To me, the last good Republican.
And likewise, the Panama Canal. You can make it look this incredible strategic importance to international shipping. We're concerned that it could fall into the hands of the bad guys.
And there are issues with China and so forth with the canal. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah.
And so absolutely, we need to protect commerce around the world by, asserting our dominance over the Panama Canal. I think those are two perfectly good foreign policy arguments and foreign policy aims.
Me too.
Yeah, just we got to have Greenland.
But again, that gets to this, and you said it a bunch of times before, and oftentimes I disagree with you, but in this case, I will agree. can't anyone play this game on your side? And certainly in the Trump administration, the answer seems to be, well, no, not really. Everyone's so worried about Donnie putting them in the cornfield that they're just going along with whatever crazy crap he happens to come up with this hour practically. And it's just, again, great agent of chaos, which is exactly what you don't want in foreign policy, in trade, in so many other areas. So
I always interpreted that Twilight Zone episode as a sort of allegory for fear of baby boomers.
Interesting. Okay.
No, I do. There's that, and there's a Star Trek episode similar, like where there's these crazy kids who there's this disease, planet where the disease kills off all the grown-ups, and these kids run everything. But yeah, that this sense of there is the Star Trek one was much more so because it was much closer because the baby boomers and the hippies were taking over at that point. But no, I think I always thought there was something about that of we're scared of our children, and we're going to defer to them and their whims, right?
Well, I do feel like the president in many ways is like a child and has his whims deferred to. So okay,
I agree. I'm just
yeah. So yeah,
I'm just making a cultural.
Gotcha. Okay, there you go. Sure, absolutely. Well, one other thing, this kind of relates in, and I want to bring this in since we have a couple minutes here. I mentioned the whole, soft authoritarianism or fascism thing. There's actually a number. One of our folks on Discord keeps on asking me effectively, "Are we there yet?" And I say, "No, we're not there yet." And someone else, Ryan, wrote in and asked, "Well, to what degree do you guys feel that democracy is in peril of becoming some sort of oligarchy with a facade of democracy? And what would be an example of the final straw that we would say?" Nope. Well, now we've got some serious problems and maybe we've crossed some red lines or a red line here or there. And this kind of, to me, brings in something that we'll be talking about in the midweek show, not the threats, but the actual actions against law firms. And I combined that with a lot of other things. And I keep on telling this person, we're not there yet, but I sure do see us getting closer to that line. And I am not an alarm. From the beginning, I have said,
you're not.
I think the system will survive Donald Trump. It's going to be bumpy and so forth, but the safeguards will prevail, will hold. I'm less sure of that now than I'd like to be. That's for sure.
Okay.
So that's where I'm at. I mean,
I guess is that a question or is that just, yeah?
I guess, yeah. I mean, that's kind of my take. So I don't think we're there yet, but all of a sudden I can envision what to me is a plausible scenario that we are there, which I couldn't a month ago even. I couldn't envision that. But now I'm starting to see it as something that, that's, I don't know, maybe 30% likelihood something. And that's got me more than a little freaked out.
Yeah, no, I'm less concerned.
Good, I guess. I hope you're right.
A whole bunch of reasons that we could talk about in the bonus show. I sort of give you the preview now, but part of it is that can anyone here play this game? There's sort of that defense of that the incompetence of fascists. If I've said this before, if every time someone calls Trump a fascist, Mussolini's got to be rolling in his grave. The lack of discipline, the lack of planning, I think that fascism is sort of a theory, a philosophy that is based on order, and Trump's world is based on chaos.
Well, I would agree. I would agree with you that a disorganized fascist or authoritarian is less of a threat than an organized, focused one.
Well, it's not a good fascist, I think, right? It's just sort of.
But he's doing the best he can, But given his nature and that, but like you said, that is of all the things that he's done, and there have been so many things in the administration already. The second administration, I've had huge problems with. I have had, and we'll get into this in the bonus show, so maybe I'll stop here, but I have so much difficulty with these executive orders targeting specific law firms. But again, something we'll get into, and maybe I'll just leave it there because I have a hard time kind of dealing with this. But
Yeah, tune into the bonus show.
Yeah, exactly. Please do that. And also, if there's anything that we talked about on this episode that you disagreed with, or, you want to give us an attaboy, whatever, just let us know. So many ways to reach us. There's mail@politicsguys.com, Facebook, X, and you always find the links in the show notes. If you're on our Discord, you're a supporter, there's that. And of course, if you are a supporter, you're going to be getting that full, uninterrupted midweek show. If you're not, you won't, but we hope you'll consider becoming a supporter, especially with that up to $500 matching thing that Don is doing. We really appreciate that. Thank you, Don. And so hope you do that. And of course, as always, if you want to get that full midweek show, you're not in a position to support us financially, just send me an email, mike@politicsguys.com, and I will get that set up for you. And as always, whether you're a supporter or not, it does help us out if you can subscribe, rate, and review us on your podcast app. So please, thank you for that. And finally, I mentioned we have a number of new executive producers, people who just wonderfully stepped up in a big way to help us out. And so this list is a little longer, and it's a testament to how wonderful you guys are. Thank you all. Wilma Moreno, Daniel Toe, Ryan Beasley, Don Oglesby, Derek Schmidt, Dakota Heath, Jason Chrysler, Dave Dean, Kathy Anderson, and Jeremy Larson. We'll be back with a new episode for you next week. We hope you'll join us.
This podcast is part of the Democracy Group,